The Roman Empire. We've all heard of it, and apparently many of us think about it almost every day. The influence of the Romans is vast and still affects our daily lives even today. Whether it's our calendar, our justice system, or even our language, we can still see lasting traces of the Romans throughout our modern culture. They were so vastly ahead of their time that it's been said if it wasn't for the fall of Rome, then we may have even visited the stars by now. The Romans brought about many great developments to the way that people live. When we think about Rome, we are reminded not only of the grandiose building projects and the world-renowned emperors, but also of one of the largest empires in history, which at its peak was able to conquer much of Europe and the Mediterranean, leaving behind its monuments, its culture, and its systems for generations to come. Even the names of many modern-day cities came from the Romans. Rome itself was a city unlike any other, a place of opulence and festivals, obsessed with its own glory, with many of its rulers living lavish lifestyles or even considering themselves to be divine. And at the time, all roads really did lead to Rome. But have you ever stopped to consider what it would really be like to live in ancient Rome? Was life as luxurious as it sounds, or is that really just the experience of the privileged few? And most importantly, if you lived in ancient Rome, who would you be? Roman society was divided into a small number of strict social classes, with the emperor at the top. And whether the emperor was good or bad, it didn't really matter, as he was the emperor. And Rome had its fair share of truly awful emperors. Most famously, people such as Caligula, who despite popular belief never actually made his horse a senator, and Nero, who enjoyed burning Christians at the stake and building statues to himself, amongst other things. In fact, his reign was so terrible that it's said the Colosseum was built as an apology to the Roman people afterwards. Underneath the emperor, you had the patricians, who were largely rich landowners and military leaders, effectively today's upper class, and the kind of people who would often make up the Senate and have a say in regards to the governing of Rome itself. These guys were closely followed by the equestrians, which would closely equate to today's upper middle class, who were fairly well off, just not as high as the senators. Now, if you were living in ancient Rome, the chance is you would make it into the next group, the plebeians or plebs, a word which is still in use today. This was by far the largest group and was made up of artisans, merchants, farmers, and even former slaves. Slaves in ancient Rome were the lowest class and had no rights to any legal protection or even rights to marry, and their experience largely depended on their owners, who were able to punish them however they wished, or even to go as far as killing them without any consequences. Now, when it came to living arrangements, we often think of these luxurious Roman villas with sprawling gardens, fountains, and even some form of running water. But the reality for the average Roman was far different, and many of them lived in cramped houses known as insulae, which often lacked any form of running water, which is something that people often forget to associate with Rome. But with the numerous public fountains throughout the city, everyone had access to clean water. Not only that, but the lucky few even had access to things such as underfloor heating. Moving on from your home to your family, in ancient Rome the men had all of the power. They were the ones who worked, engaged in politics, or served in the military, which in itself was not for the soft-hearted. The soldiers themselves had to endure intense training, which often involved marching up to 20 miles a day in full armour, as well as strict discipline and rigorous weapons training. And once you were through basic training, you were often shipped off to the front line for a trial by fire. And that's where the real initiation began. Women, on the other hand, were responsible for managing the household and the children. Although, the wealthier you were, the more time and freedom you generally had. Although women themselves didn't engage in things such as politics, with a few notable exceptions, they were often able to exhibit such influence through their husbands, or even through their own financial affairs. The Roman economy as a whole was largely a physical economy, and most of the day jobs were fairly backbreaking. Imagine for a moment having to build some of those impressive structures or work all day in the sun on a farm, without any modern equipment or machinery. Most of the work was done by hand, although slaves from across the empire certainly helped when it came to the daily grind. The Romans were a seafaring empire, And because of their well-established trade routes, goods such as silk, spices, dyes, and many other luxuries were brought in from across the empire, and even beyond, with the infamous Silk Road stretching all the way to China. But unfortunately for the average Roman, silk was a symbol of luxury, and largely out of reach. The sad reality for most people were the long work days in dangerous and difficult conditions, working in areas such as construction, farming, or even in the dark down a mine. Bear in mind that health and safety hadn't been invented yet, and so going to work really was a life and death situation. And what you ate when you got home from work also depended on who you were. As is similar in modern day Italy, bread was a staple of the Roman diet, along with beans, lentils, chickpeas, and various other vegetables. And most people were living off various stews and salads, often washed down with a glass of wine, which was commonplace amongst all social classes. In fact, wine played an important role in Roman society, so much so that they even drank it for breakfast. Not only that, but it played a large part in the economy as well, being exported all over the empire and was even used as medicine, with some of the wealthier members of society choosing to bathe in it. Overall though, the Roman diet was fairly basic, and most people just ate what they could afford. Things such as meat and fish were often reserved for the wealthier classes, for whom dinner itself was considered a social gathering in which there were strict hierarchies and rules. As time went on, the guests, especially the men, took to eating their dinner lying down, something which is much easier said than done. If you were an everyday Roman citizen, however, something you definitely wouldn't want to miss would be the vast variety of entertainment. Everything from theatre shows, chariot races, a visit to the public baths, or famously a trip to watch the gladiators battle it out. Romans didn't shy away from seeing bloody spectacles, with the Colosseum hosting not only the gladiator fights, which would often end in the death of one of the contestants, but also a variety of hunts, in which exotic animals were imported from abroad and hunted for sport, as well as its numerous public executions. It's even known that the Colosseum was filled with water and used to reenact naval battles. It's a part of Roman life that has really stood the test of time, and it's still standing to this day. So if you haven't already been there, then it's definitely worth a trip to see just how impressive it would have been in its heyday. Aside from just the Colosseum though, plenty of other theatres and amphitheatres were dotted about the city to host the many plays and other performances put on for the public. The other important and often overlooked part of Roman daily life was a visit to the bathhouses, which were open to just about everyone, and weren't just used for bathing, but were important for relaxing, exercising, socialising, and even conducting business. There was a much more relaxed atmosphere in a Roman bath than outside, and so even if you were down the lower end of the social scale, it was still possible to mingle with people from a variety of social classes. Festivals played a similar role and were also more relaxed, happening throughout the year to provide a break from work, and were often done in honour of one of the numerous Roman gods or to celebrate a political victory. During certain festivals, slaves were given temporary freedom for the day, and at times even permitted to eat with their masters. It was a time of lavishness, where food and drink were plentiful, and they were something that the average citizen would look forward to as an escape from their daily life. As we begin to bring things to a close, I hope you can see that although Roman life was often basic and fairly unforgiving, it was still the most advanced culture of its time, and bears some similarity to the way we live today. Rome itself was a place of splendour. It had the beautiful buildings, alongside the social and political culture to thrive in a world which was far more difficult than that of today's. Rome itself was the first city to reach a population of 1 million people, which is quite an achievement, and the fact that it still fascinates us shows just how great the influence of ancient Rome is in our modern world. So when it comes to a time such as this, it's interesting to wonder who you would be and what your life would be like if you were living in the 1st century in ancient Rome. Thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe for more, and we'll see you next time.